Since it was announced in the past couple of weeks that Peugeot was seriously considering adding a wing to the 9X8 as part of an Evo package to make it more competitive, it seemed like as good a time as any to take a look back at Peugeot Sport's first two Le Mans prototypes, the 905 and 908, both of which had decidedly substantial rear wings. Incidentally, I am going to be pronouncing it Peugeot throughout the video, so for anybody that wants to get persnickety about pronunciation, I'll say it both ways now, and then you can splice in whichever one you prefer to hear in your mind. It's either Peugeot or Peugeot, or I suppose if we wanted to be particularly American about it, we could call it Peugeot or Peugeot, which just sounds like a cheap Chinese knockoff of a card game and television show anime that was popular 20 years ago. Okay, dating myself a bit. Though Peugeot's engines had powered a number of vehicles to compete at Le Mans, Peugeot themselves had never built a complete racer to compete under their own banner. After finding themselves regulated into obsolescence due to their success in the World Rally Championship, the motorsports arm of Peugeot, at that time known as Peugeot Talbot Sport and led by Jean Todt, was given the go-ahead to develop a Group C prototype that would wear the Lion badge for the first time, banking on the fact that the newly announced revisions to the Group C regulations favoring Formula One-focused engines meant that they would have a more level playing field than the uphill battle they would have faced in previous years against the likes of Jaguar and Mercedes. As a reminder, and as mentioned in the Lola T92-10 video, these regulations were essentially a political move by Bernie Ecclestone, veiled in the guise of convergence, to suborn Le Mans to Formula One from an engineering perspective, which at the time meant banning turbocharged engines and establishing a displacement limit of 3.5 liters, which, thank heavens, he didn't succeed in the long run. Anyway, primarily designed by Monsieur André de Coutances, whose previous experience included design work for Alpine and racing in various formula classes, he realized that Peugeot Sport, while well-versed in rallying, lacked the capacity and expertise to develop endurance prototypes that ran on that razor's edge between power, aerodynamics, and weight. Thus, French aerospace pioneers Dassault were enlisted to help return the tricolor to the top step of endurance racing's highest podium. Highest in a figurative sense, of course. From an altitude perspective, the highest endurance racing podium is probably the very well-known 6 hours of Machu Picchu, run around the highest mountains of Nepal every never. Commencing work in 1988, Dassault sent to work on the chassis and aerodynamics, while Peugeot set to work on the drivetrain, developing a 3.5-liter aluminum V10 with 4 valves per cylinder, naturally aspirated, that foreshadowed with remarkable foresight the power plants to come in Formula One. Paired as a semi-stressed chassis component to a 6-speed sequential manual gearbox sending power to the rear wheels, the drivetrain was eventually capable of 670 horsepower at 12,500 RPM. Dassault had similarly outdone themselves, designing a primarily carbon fiber monocoque that, similar to the Aston AMR1 and Lola T92-10, largely resembled a Formula One car with additional bodywork and weighed in at a paltry 750 kilos or 1,654 pounds, less driver and fluids. Even the suspension echoed Formula One cars of the era, with double wishbones and push rods and additional dampers for better road holding. Dassault also made an effort to include some design elements of contemporaneous road-going Peugeots, for which they receive a tip of my proverbial hat, but the original design of the 905, not dissimilar to the current 9X8, did perhaps focus a bit more heavily on the aesthetic side than the practical, and after a disappointing showing in the first few races at the end of the 1990 and beginning of the 1991 seasons, including both cars failing to finish more than 4 hours at Le Mans that year, it was decided revisions were needed. And perhaps, as we will see with the 9X8, the decision was that it needed a big effing rear wing. In contrast, however, I think that the addition of the BFW to the 905 quite helped aesthetically, whereas I can't see the 9X8 being improved by wingedness, especially given current design trends in the rear wing/spoiler department. It is worth mentioning that the performance disappointment stemmed from its competitiveness against older Group C cars in the 1990 season, namely the Jag XJR14, rather than against other prototypes entered under the new 3.5-liter rule set, against which it actually performed rather well, but this hints at one of the reasons that Mr. Eccleston found himself foiled in his skullduggery. But anyway, after the resounding disappointment of Le Mans in 1991, the 905B, or 905 Evo, emerged, which is most of what you've seen pictured so far because there aren't that many chassis in existence, and that's what I have pictures of from Le Mans Classic. With revised mechanics and bodywork, including a reworked engine that achieved the aforementioned 670 horsepower, a new nose, optional front spoiler, and reworked air intakes, but most notably the massive rear wing, again similar to the dual-element designs we saw on the XJR14 and the T92. These modifications proved to be what the 905 needed, bringing victory in the final 2 rounds of the 91 season and second in the season championship. 1992 saw an enormous drop-off in participation for the full season, again because of Satan Eccleston's influence, with Toyota the only other manufacturer participating in the full season. Le Mans, however, remained hotly contested, but the 905B managed to take first and third in the race, with the winning car driven by the team of Yannick Dalmas, Derek Warwick, and Marc Blondel. The same team took first in the championship, while the other car of Philippe Alliot, Mauro Baldi, and Jean-Pierre Jabouille came second. Come 1993, however, there was no World Sports Car Championship for the first time in 40 years, as nobody was really interested, given Satan Eccleston's chicanery, and the focus rested solely on Le Mans. This came as something of a disappointment to the Peugeot team, as they had started development on the Evo 2, which sported decidedly stabby aerodynamics that rather foreshadowed the developments we'd see in closed cockpit LMP1s a decade and a half later, and was affectionately dubbed the Supercopter. However, come Le Mans, Peugeot decided to play it safe and sent out 3 905Bs to defend their title. Apparently a good decision, as they came home first, second, and third overall, with the second-placed car only a lap behind the leader and third behind by 8. Content with these results, they closed up the sports car shop and switched to Formula One with the same engine, which never proved quite as successful, and eventually they found themselves back at Circuit de Sarthe in 2007 with the 908. But that's a story for, well, I'd say another video, and that's strictly true, but it's coming up in about 3 minutes, so stick around for that. And for this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
I won't ask for any of those things, but I will extend an invitation to all of those listening to join me this Sunday for the live premiere of my IMSA Year in Review video, which took far too much time and too many of my brain cells to create, and I'd like to have the satisfaction of an active live chat for its debut. Rather than the normal 6 p.m. Eastern Time, it will start at 5 o'clock as it's a bit more than 2 hours long and there are dinners to consider and so on. Anyway, hope you'll join me, and if not, well, enjoy the 908 video coming up shortly. And either way, as always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all a good night and a good tomorrow.